ready, Jen.
I'm ready.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on considerations for safety planning with survivor parents during modified supervised visitation services, hosted by Inspire in partnership with the Office on Violence Against Women. We wanted to let you all know that we are recording today's session so that we can post it on our website, just in case folks want to re-listen or staff wasn't able to join. It'll be available for you in the coming days. And we also wanted to let you know that while we're in partnership with OVW and we try very hard to stay in line with the thoughts and feelings and the guiding principles of OVW, we want to be very clear that all of what we share coming from Inspire is from Inspire and not a mandate from OVW. So with that, we want to welcome you, to say thanks for joining us, thanks for being willing to be in this with us, and we will take bite-sized pieces in the next couple of days. Today, tomorrow, and Monday, we're having a series of webinars to help us navigate the time that you're all in right now and to support you in a way that can be as meaningful and not overwhelming as possible. So those are our goals. So with me today on the call is Jennifer and Amrita, the usual suspects at Inspire. So here we all are. Amrita is going to do an amazing job of navigating all of the chat questions. As you may have noticed, we have a different platform than we normally join you with. This is just a webinar only platform. We felt like it would help us streamline getting content to you in a very short amount of time. And then whenever we join back with our regular drop-in calls, we'll come back to our regular platform of Zoom so that we can see each other and have conversation that way. But for these webinar series, we're just going to do this platform. So it may look a little different for you all. So welcome. And what we want to do, as we always do with you, is take just a moment of reflection before we start digging in and diving in to some deep thinking, is to give you a moment of pause. And today we're taking up safety planning in a time of complete uncertainty for all of us. So we wanted to have this question in a moment where you to just think about it. If you're not in a space where you can take this on fully right now, encourage you to just grab a little scrap piece of paper or Post-it note, whatever you have close by, and write this question down. What fears are surfacing for you when it comes to providing remote access to families? And just think about it, and just think for a moment about what comes up, what bubbles up, what are your immediate thoughts, what are the fears that you're holding and harboring around moving to this place, and explore those. And then once you have your time of reflection, we would encourage you to do this with staff as well. So to pose this question to your staff at large and have a conversation about it as just a place for you all to hold how it is that we're coming to this work in a different time, and also making sure that then we can check our fears are helpful. They keep us in check. They keep us in a moment of careful consideration, but we can also be overridden with fear. And if we allow fear to drive all of our decisions, we're not going to come into a place where we feel good at the end. So making sure that you have the balance of fear is good. It helps keep us in check. And if we weren't afraid, we wouldn't care. And so it's an indication of caring, but at the same time, making sure that you're balancing that with making sure that the reality of what's really happening and what you can do to change those fear-based decisions come from a good place. So with that, I will give you that homework and we're going to start.
And I did see some folks typing in the chat box. If you want to share there, we'd love to see them, but it's not necessary. But feel free to share with the rest of the group if you'd like. Hi everyone, it's Jennifer. So nice to be here with you all today. And just taking some time as we start to do a series of webinars to do what we try to always do, which is really start with the lived experiences of the families we're working with, in particular survivors and their children. And making sure that as we navigate forward these uncharted waters, we are keeping those survivors and kids on our shoulders. We're being consistent with our thoughts and ideas of letting them lead and being central, listening to their voices, and also just recognizing that on top of what are already complex and difficult ways of existing, survivors are now navigating a whole new set of circumstances that they're trying to figure out. And so in all the ways that we can be supportive and listen and learn from them, we wanted to start with just some suggestions and ideas, and we're sure you all have a host of things that you all are doing. And so that kind of stuff, we'd love for you to chat in the chat box anytime to share with the group and to share with us as we continue forward. So we wanted to start with this idea of the current conditions for survivors, right? And just remembering what they're navigating, which is similar to what many of us are navigating, only hopefully many of us aren't also experiencing fear of coercion and power and control, right? You know, this idea of safe at home, right? Many of the countries are either doing safe at home or are mandated to safe at home. And what we know for survivors is that can feel like an oxymoron, right? That home isn't necessarily a safe place. And so what does this mean? Where does this leave many survivors? How are they reframing in order to both survive and to continue moving forward in the ways that all of us are during this pandemic? We want to remember that survivors may be weighing risk and safety very differently than they did before COVID-19. As we always know, survivors often think about safety as more broad than just their physical safety. There's their emotional and psychological safety, the social conditions that they're navigating, their job, their community, their children, all of these other things that often take sort of a lower seat to their physical risk. But in these moments, this may be even more true. And so the ways in which we hold space for that and planning with them around that, as well as really checking our judgments around some of the decisions that survivors may be coming to us making, and to recognize that however we can open the door so that survivors feel that they can tell us honestly what the choices that they're making and what they need so we can be the best resource is really important. And then again, just this additional fear and stress, recognizing, you know, many of us are going to have people who get sick. There may be losses, employment, and the social isolation are just compounded for survivors at this particular moment. And so we just want to hold that in our heads and our hearts as we're thinking about our work with the folks who we're trying to serve in a very new way. And Rita, will you change the slide? So some things to remember, right? And we don't want to start from a fearful place. And we also want to recognize that, you know, in these moments, sometimes people bring their best selves, and these are also opportunities for people to misuse the current conditions that people are living in, to escalate violence. We also know that people who use violence are experiencing additional stress and trauma and employment loss, and all of the indicators that can come into play to escalate power and control and a sense of powerlessness. So we want to recognize that our remote services will not be safe and appropriate for all families, right? So this idea that you often hear us saying that, you know, our job isn't to make visits happen, it's ensure if they happen safely. This is also true in this moment. And so just holding that truth and holding that we are going to do our best to make the modifications and the changes we're making accessible and available to as many families as possible. And there may be some who just is not safe or appropriate. So use your staff, use your partners, use Inspire and other folks who you reach out to navigate some of these things that may arise, and to just be gentle with yourselves, and knowing that there are some families who may have to wait a period of time before we're able to provide services to them again. Some families need intensive and heightened level of service, and that may be possible in a modified way, and it may require a lot of extra precautions and thinking and sort of understanding from us around what is needed. We need to stay very connected as we can to our courts and our other partners, and in particular, our domestic violence partners. I would encourage each and every one of you, if you're not, well, even if you're a domestic violence program, to find time in the next week or two to reach out to your domestic violence organization, if you haven't, and connect with their advocates to see how things are going and what they're hearing, to let them know what it is you all are trying to do to support families, and to really deepen that relationship in any way you can. We all know that the advocates in our communities are, many of them are still running shelters. They're trying to provide remote advocacy and support. There's a lot of unknowns. So, put it on your to-do list if you haven't already, to reach out to your domestic violence partners and see how you can work together and learn from each other around how to best meet the needs of survivors in your communities right now. And last, not least, or even last, there's probably many others, but we want to keep holding this idea that working with people who cause harm is a strategy for supporting survivor and child safety, right? So how are we maintaining those relationships? How are we bringing care and compassion? And we're going to spend some time next week really diving deeper into some strategies around supporting people who use violence right now. And maybe even if we can't provide services or during services, and just recognizing that the more connected we can stay to them, the unique things we can do to keep them connected to their children in some way isn't just about supporting them, which is important, but is one of our strategies for supporting safety for survivors and children. So working with people who use violence is a victim service, and we want to keep holding that true as we navigate these waters. Amrita? So for those of you who have been to our immersion and have talked with us about our visitation planning framework, that is true for us now too, right? So we want to think about, in our modified services, how we're planning for safety with survivors, and how are we applying the strategies that we believe ensure our work is done in a way that is true to our values and help us meet the goals and ideals we have for working with families, right? So thinking about how individually, right, for each family, how are we supporting the safety of the person who needs protection? What's happening for them now that wasn't maybe true? What are some unique triggers? We have to know that for many people right now, there are new triggers that are coming about. People who are living in New York who went through 9/11, people who've been through other environmental disasters or other things in their communities. Like, these types of moments can often trigger these other experiences that people have had. So what is true? What is happening for the survivors who we're working with? What are some of the new risks that they feel are apparent under these conditions that we're all living in? So taking time, and as many of you have told us you're doing, really reconnecting, having a new orientation, creating ways for checking in, right? And taking the time to ask these questions again, and to learn now what might be true and what folks might need us to be paying attention to. Connection. Connection is going to be so huge for families right now. And connection, even if we're not able to provide services, right? How are we finding opportunities? The word deliberate really stands out to me. How are we being really deliberate about connecting with people, talking with people, helping people feel connected? For folks who are living alone right now, or, living only with their child, I think about victim visiting parents who may be living in a small apartment all by themselves without their children, trying to navigate this time. How are we finding ways to be connected, to show our care, and to be there in a really thoughtful and loving way for the folks who we're working with? Next. I was listening to a podcast today, and Brene Brown, who she's getting me through this time for sure. And she said, you know, there isn't enough love, right? There isn't enough care and compassion. We cannot exhaust the giving of care and love and compassion right now. And so how do we start from that place? How do we use that as our entryway into supporting folks? How are we making sure that we're just recognizing people's humanity as well in these particular moments, and not just their unique circumstances, but just humanity in general? This has really shifted, but when this pandemic started, I recognized so many calls I would call into, and people were just like down to business. And it always just sort of struck me, right? Like how we lose our humanity sometimes in these moments. And how do we just stop and always start with, how are you? And a genuine, how are you? I want to really know how you are right now. And really starting from this place of humanity and being with people, and recognizing, you know, that some people have more and some people have less, and what are the needs that folks need to just even feel like they're gurgling above water, right? And how do we ensure that that's part of our conversations in the way that we're planning for safety, right? Because again, safety is not this static thing around one's physical safety, but safety is comprehensive in terms of someone's overall well-being, and how are we accounting for that and considering that and supporting people around getting that level of being safer met. And then how are we going to counteract tactics of ongoing battering and power and control and coercion? This is going to be different for us. This is going to be unique. We're going to have to really navigate this. And we'll spend some time next week when we talk more specifically about working with people who cause harm. But again, keeping those survivors and kids front and center, and letting them tell us what are the things that are happening, what their concerns are in these new circumstances as far as supporting their safety. Next. So this is where we want us all to start, right? We need to be survivor-led. We need to take time to learn from survivor parents and children. We need to ask them what it is they're doing now to keep themselves safe. How can we partner in that? What do they feel we can do to support them in being safer during these times? This is one of those moments where survivors are weighing risk in all these different ways and are going to make choices that may be different than they would in a different moment. And so how are we really listening and taking in and not judging those decisions that they're making, and recognizing they're doing the best they can to make some really difficult decisions right now? And just letting them lead, letting them sort of help us, and then partnering as we're learning new information and new ideas and new strategies to be able to share those as well. Again, creating, I think we can't say this enough, which is probably why it keeps showing up, like how are we carving out space? How are we making time to check in? How are we making time to be connected, and to really build new, deeper partnerships with the survivors who we're working with in this particular moment? For some survivors, we may be one of the only points of connection they have during the week. And I don't say that as a something to overwhelm us, but just to remember that may be true, right? And so our listening and being there and partnering could be life-saving, and could be the very thing that really helps them get through this hard time. And again, we're going to tailor our services, and we want them to be responsive and reflective to each individual survivor's needs, knowing that they're going to be different and their circumstances are going to be different, and it's going to probably be ever-changing. As this thing evolves, people are going to need different things, we're going to need different things, and so we want to be as nimble and open as we can be to shifting and changing and moving as things happen around us. Next. So again, connecting, having opportunities for parents to connect with staff, but also supporting survivors. And we're going to talk a little bit more about like a care plan, but really exploring with survivors, who are their resources, who can they create time to connect with for ongoing support. So who are their people? Who are the people in their life who they can, you know, think with you about, who they can set up time, whether it's a phone call or a FaceTime or Zoom call or whatever it is. Zoom is now going to be on everybody's phone. But like, how do we help people not just connect with us, but think about who are the people they can connect with? What are the resources in the community? This may be a time more than ever for those survivors who didn't really want to connect with advocates, that they may really need that more than ever and may be more open because they need as much support and care and people to talk to as possible during this really difficult time. Next. So we're going to want to practice, right? And we're going to spend time tomorrow really getting into the nuts and bolts of remote visitation. But a key piece here is going to be to take time to practice with survivors, to practice the technology, to give them a chance to sit in front of a screen, give them a chance to think about in this new setting, what risks might come about, what might be the unintended things that we haven't considered yet. What do they think may occur? What type of harm might occur with remote services or modified exchanges or the different things that we may be doing with families in order to continue to facilitate some sort of interaction and connection for families during this time. And sometimes it's not until you're sitting in front of the screen or you're given it a try, you're practicing, that you may think of things, right? So take that time to do a practice session, to get them online, to think about how it's going to work. Does it work? And what are the risks that they may come up with that we need to mitigate or get in front of prior to the actual remote visitation or service happens. Next, Amrita. So some things to explore with survivor parents. And some of you have thought of these, and feel free to chat in the chat box if there's other things that we're not getting at that you think need some deeper dive, because we would love to also be learning from you while we're thinking about this today. So if a survivor is in a confidential location, right, and you're going to want that survivor to think about how they're going to navigate these visits to not be identified. You know, are they staying at a parent's house or a friend's house, or are they in a shelter? And so if visits are going to happen remotely and they are going to be video, what are the types of things that can be put in place to ensure that there's not something identifiable? Think about, you know, if they're at their parents' house and there's a lamp that someone knows about, or a picture on the wall that would give away where they are. Really taking time to sort of think those things through, and also ideas or concerns around the connection, around the technology. What are the types of things that the survivor might be afraid of? You know, as we keep saying, we are building the ship while we're sailing it. And I like to say, like, in a tornado even. So there's lots of things we haven't thought of yet. There's lots of things that are going to emerge as we're trying to move forward with doing these services. And, you know, often we would want to take more time and think things through. And in an effort to kind of get things up and going and moving as quickly as possible, some of us are just jumping in. And we're not saying jumping in is a bad thing. And we don't want people to be fearful, right? We started with that reflection because sometimes fear can just freeze us, right? And then we don't move forward, and all we're thinking of all the worst case scenarios, and we miss all of the possible opportunities that we can be providing in doing this. So for us to stay connected to survivors and to each other, and to be thinking these things through in an ongoing way will be really important, because that is how we'll keep learning and things will emerge over time too. Next. Other things to explore, right? In addition to technology, one thing that I think we all want to be thinking about in particular is access to, right? So we're all sort of jumping into this very technological world, and it's easy, and I'm sure in some more remote areas and areas where people have less resources, you know, people are on, you know, phones that have very limited minutes or data or no data. They don't have computers or tablets. They don't have very good internet services. And while there are resources out there now to get some of these things in people's lives, we have to be also recognizing that for many, this alone would be a big challenge. So how are we thinking about that? So how are we thinking in our programs? Are there things that we can help people get access to in order to make this more possible? And so as we jump in, also really starting with exploring what do folks have available to them, rather than, here's where we start, we're going to do remote visits, but really starting with the question, what is possible? What would be possible for you? How can we start there? Where are parents living, right? And are they living with other people? So are there concerns about who might show up in the visit? Who might, dance across the screen in the backyard or background or show something or all of a sudden be in the same space as the other parent? We'll talk tomorrow about technology and the control we have with navigating that if it's not somebody who's actually in the house with the visiting parent. But if it's somebody who's in the house with the visiting parent, it'd be easy for them to pop their head in or do those kinds of things. So are there concerns about that? What does that look like? Who are they? How do we navigate that? How do we get in front of really letting everybody know what's okay and what's not okay? Our transparency will be really important. Messages being passed in subtle ways. There's a lot that we don't know. And when we're in our own centers, we're able to sort of control the environment. But in this remote visitation, we won't have as much control over the environment and what's in the room or a photo or a lamp or a stuffed animal or all of the things that could be these sort of subtle ways that people who use violence, pass messages, or try to cause harm may pop up. So again, asking these questions in this particular setting, in this way, what are your concerns? What are the messages that you feel might be passed on? And this is a place to hold the balance, right? We don't want to become even more rigid, battering tactic detectives because of our own fear and concerns. So we want to be mindful of that in this moment as well. And there are new things that are going to emerge. So talking with survivors and exploring these will be a key way to understand how in these conditions with services being offered in this way, do they think the person, their partner, may try to cause ongoing harm or pass messages? Partnering around their children's safety and what their kids need to feel safe. This is going to be new and different for kids. Some of you have started doing these and kids have seemed, okay. But what we know is that this is new and different. Kids are probably missing their parent, and there's a lot probably going on in these little humans' minds and hearts. And so what do their kids need to feel safe? How can that parent support them around that? And then we'll spend some more time in a little bit really thinking about walking through the different stages of our services. What do they need before or after visits to feel safe, and not just physically safe, but emotionally safe, and to feel connected and to getting what they need from either us or other support systems around them. Next. So what we want to encourage is really sitting with survivors and kids, and I think this is something we could do with people who use violence as well, in maybe a little different frame, but really helping people think about a support plan, right? What kind of support do survivors need right now? Who can they get it from? How can they be real intentional about jotting things down, about having people who are available, whether it's during a visit or after a visit? How can we really help people craft something that they can have? What we know about trauma is, we're not very linear in our thinking, and we can be really scattered and all over the place. And sometimes we're on overdrive, and sometimes we're on total freeze, and we don't even know that's happening for us. For those of you who have been to our children's training where we talk about this concept of lid flipping, right? I mean, I feel like we're in a global lid flip right now for many of us, right? And we're doing the best we can. So the more planful we can support people in being, and sort of having that piece of paper in front of them that says, you know, when you need something, here's who you decided or thought you could call, right, with the phone number. And so it doesn't have to be real complicated, but taking time to create a support plan will be a really helpful strategy and tip in working with survivors. We recently, I want to share this idea of pod mapping, and we'll share the link with you in more details. But there's an organization in the Bay Area that really created this for survivors, and it's this idea of, you know, really having survivors put themselves in the middle, right, and writing their names down, and then thinking about, you know, who is there to support them, right, and taking the time to write down people, to write down resources, to really have a visual of what is out there and who they're connected to and who they can go to when they're needing support and wanting to be connected to a larger community. And so we'll share that link, and there's a worksheet, and encourage folks to sort of look more into this. I think it could be a great strategy and something you could do that would just also be really healing for some survivors, right? When you're doing a virtual call, you know, it's something you could send to them and just have them think about, you know, who is out there and who are the resources and what they might, what they do have available to them. And then for some, if it shows up that there's not very much, then that may be a person who we need to do some more in-depth support with, and help find, maybe they're not their social connections, but other connections in the community that may be available to offer support. Luce, I'm just going to pause for a minute. I see your question here, and I have a client that's worried about the background and what might trigger her and the children. The visiting parent resides in the old home where the abuse has occurred. Absolutely. So, you know, for that person, we may want to think creatively with the other parent and invite them, you know, help think about where they're going to be, help think about where they're having the visit, encouraging a place, you know. I was listening to another call, and there's a lot of folks who are doing battering intervention or abuse intervention programs, and some of these guys are living, these folks are living in home with the person who they're causing harm to. So they're having them go out to their car to do group, right? To like get away so survivors aren't listening. So, and not so they're not listening, but so they're not being harmed by what they might be hearing. So we may need to get really creative, and if folks want to have these visits happen, we may have to work with them about where are you planning to be for the visit. You know, we know you're in the old home. We want to be mindful that, you know, no further harm comes. Allison just said, right, and you can also have him change the background on Zoom, at least so she's not seeing the house. It makes me think, I wonder if we could set a background for Zoom. I don't know. It's definitely something to look at. But Allison, that's a great idea. And also thinking, you know, really setting up where people are going to be. And if they're not able to be in those places, we may have to, you know, just have their voices, and maybe they can't be seen if they're not willing to sort of work with us in those moments to make it feel safe. But these are the very things that, you know, we need to be thinking about and sort of figuring out how we can mitigate up front, so that, again, like the train doesn't like leave the gate in front of us as we're also navigating this new technology. So it's okay to be slowing it down and taking our time a little bit, even though we want to be moving so quickly because we want to make these things happen for the folks who we're serving. It's okay for us to not, you know, trauma causes urgency thinking, a colleague of ours said to us, and that really resonated with me, right? It makes us think like, we gotta do it now, we gotta do it now, we gotta do it now. And while we want to, we also can recognize like, oh, maybe I need to just slow it down a little bit so that we can make sure we have all the things we need in place, we're having the conversations we need to have, and that when we have to do what we're doing, we can do it as safely as possible. Amrita, will you flip? Thanks. So here are some considerations, and in our visitation planning, and this is like our visitation planning during a pandemic, right? Things to consider, right? We want to consider the logistics of how the remote visit will take place. Again, this ties into what we were just saying, like, how's it going to happen? What's the technology? Where is it going to happen? Where's everybody going to be? Really getting these things planned, obviously, as upfront as we can. And in a check-in with survivors prior to visits, this may be things we just want to check back in on around and make sure everything's up and running and things are set up in as safe a way as possible. I think this question of where the survivor is going to be during the visit is going to be a survivor by survivor kind of thing to figure out, right? I heard someone who said, you know, during the visit, they asked the parent to not be in the room during the visit in order to try to create as sort of normal service as possible, considering that's how it would be if they were on site. That may be okay for some, that may be more difficult for others. When we're thinking about young children, well, children are more savvy than most of us in technology. Some are. For very young children, that survivor parent may need to be there in some way to help get things set up, to be a part of helping that child. And so we want to really think with that parent. We want to think about how that gets set up, how we get everyone the support they need. And then what does that mean for that survivor parent who, you know, even if they're not in the room and they're in their house, if they're listening, if they're taking it in, really taking time to sort of explore that. I have to say, and I've been saying this out loud a lot this week, I've just been holding visiting survivor parents in my heart in this really tender and like painful way, and thinking about what it must be like to be alone, to not have their children, to know their child is with the other parent, to not have access all the time to knowing how they're doing, to be there to comfort, to be a part of this with their child. And I'm sure that's true for all visiting parents, but overlaying the fear and trauma that a survivor parent has also experienced. I've been thinking a lot about this. So, you know, really thinking about survivor visiting parents, what do they need to feel safe? Where are they, and are they in a safe location? What are the concerns they have, knowing that, well, we may ask the other parent to not be in the room. They may be in the room. They're going to be listening potentially. Like, how are we navigating that? How are we, again, this is one of those moments where we can counteract the ongoing abuse that may happen. Here's where we have that really important role that regardless of custodial status, we have a role of intervening and interrupting ongoing harm. And so how can we plan with victim survivor parents who are visiting to help navigate that and think about that, and to think about interventions, right? I mean, in this moment where this visiting victim parent, this is the only opportunity they have to connect with their kids, and the other parent does something that we may feel we need to intervene or interrupt or stop the visit. How does that survivor parent want us to intervene? What do they need? What is their boundary around their own safety, or you know, the other parent popping up versus losing the opportunity to be connected with their child at this time? So this is something we're going to really have to grapple with. It's going to probably push us in ways that we're not going to feel comfortable being pushed, and trying to figure out how we hold this in the best way possible for these parents, while recognizing that that parent who's caused harm has more control than ever, and that these visits by Zoom or however we may do them, or by phone, may be her only or their only access. And so how are we strategizing with those parents to try to support them in the best way possible? And then, of course, what do children need? What do they need to prepare for the visits? What can survivor parents do to support their kids, to get them ready, to help navigate this very different way of connecting with the other parent? Beth, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Great.
Okay. I was like, I should pause for a minute. Maybe there's something else to say. All right, Amrita, will you move the slide?
And also to note, so this is the first of many webinars that we're going to host. So tomorrow we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts. So we'll take another piece tomorrow, and then Monday we're going to focus on how we support kids during this process. And next Wednesday, the person who uses violence we're going to take on. So lots of opportunities to think about all of the moving parts that we have going on.
Thanks for that. And it's a good reminder, you know, we are really focusing on survivors, and while I'm dropping in pieces about the whole family, we really wanted to start this series grounding us in the lived experience of survivors and their experiences and how we're supporting them, and recognizing, you know, that what we've often talked about together is that survivors can be the most difficult, in that they challenge us, they push the rules and boundaries, and understandably, because they are living with tremendous fear and trauma, and the experiences of the coercion and power and control and all of those pieces. And so that is still true even in these circumstances, and even like on steroids, right? And so when they're resistant and not sure or uncomfortable, it can be easy to go to this place of, you know, well, come on, it's a pandemic. Like, can you just lighten up, or why are you being difficult, or why aren't you, you know, yes butting, all of these things, because the other parent is being maybe so compliant, and you know, there's this idea of like, let's all get along right now. And while that's true for some, like in these circumstances, we have to recognize that survivors, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. We don't know the choices they're making, the fear that they're experiencing. And so their pushback or resistance to us, again, like, how do we really grab that with as much care and compassion and understanding, and get really curious to understand what's happening and what they need and what's going on for them, so that we are sure we're not moving forward from a place that creates more risk and harm, or really negates the experience of being a survivor to this larger experience we're all having collectively of living in this pandemic. So it's just a moment for us to just have some way to check ourselves in those moments, and recognize the experiences of survivors and what's happening for them, and how we want to just try not to have that judgment or go to those places of victim blaming that I think could come up for all of us, or any of us at any time during this work. So during visits, right? How can the survivor parent care for themselves? Like, make a plan. What are they, if they're not, what are they going to do? Where are they going to be? Can they, you know, put on some headphones and listen to something that brings them comfort? You know, are they reading a book? Is there someone who they can be on the phone with, a friend or a family member, or what can they be doing to care for themselves? Because where visits were happening outside of the home, they're now happening in their home. You know, maybe not physically in the room, but that person is being beamed to the place they're living, and that's going to be different. So how can they care for themselves? What kind of support do they need outside of us, and what do they need from us? And thinking about how can that survivor parent connect with staff during a visit if needed? What might that look like, right? So maybe that parent is going to listen in, and that parent hears something that is a risk or a concern. You know, are there ways that that parent can have someone who they can connect with, or if something's going on that they need while the visits are happening? Is there a way to have a plan for them to get some support from either the person doing the visit or another staff member, to kind of think through during visits how a parent may be able to notify staff if something's happening or there's a concern. Next.
Then to remember also, for each of these moments of time, before visits, during visits, and after visits, that when you have survivor parents who are the visiting parent, to make sure that you're intentionally thinking about each one of those things in the context of their reality, and how you can provide support and plan and create a care plan that is unique and different during this moment in time, no matter how they're being connected and where they're connecting to. It offers differences that we want you to kind of think about unique to that.
Thanks, Beth. So then after each visit, you'll want to establish how the survivor parent wants to check in. They may not want to check in right after. They may want to just be with their kid right after, or they may want to check in right after. Really create a plan for what that's going to look like, how you all are going to connect about how things are going. Again, this idea of what do they need, how in the support plan is an after visit plan put in place, what that might look like, how they might get support either from us, our programs, or from somebody else, and how and what will they need to support their children after visits. This is going to be different for all kids of all ages, circumstances, but there's lots of resources out there about supporting kids in general, but in particular right now. Erin will talk more on Monday about some of these things, but encouraging parents to have some special time right after the visits. What can they do to connect with their kids, to make space for their kids, not necessarily even to talk about the visit, but just to feel connected to them as their parent, to share concerns if they have them, and just to have something after. Maybe it's sitting down and having cookies and milk, or a cup of tea, or playing a game, or just some snuggle time on the couch, or whatever it might be that they may create a way to have some routine, right? And we'll talk more about, again, how we're creating predictability and routine for young people, but I think we as adults need that as much right now too. And so having them think about what's going to be the thing they do after visits. It doesn't have to be long. It can be 5 minutes. It can be 10 minutes, just to create some way to come together and be with their kids. And also knowing that we'll also want to create check-in time with kids after our visits, with them after their visits, to sort of see how they're doing and see what they need in the same way we would if they were coming to our programs. So what we recognize is that those of you in particular who are doing this work every day with families and connecting with survivors and hearing these really hard stories and experiencing our own sort of grief and loss and fear and all of those things that we are all experiencing right now, uncertainty, navigating our work in this very different way, to continue to be led by survivors, to be defined by the families we're working with, to continue to lead with care and compassion. We need to find ways that we are caring for ourselves and each other. And so here are just some suggestions that we have, and I'm sure there are more, and we'd love to also hear from you all about what are the things you're doing. What are you doing for your team? What are you doing for yourselves? But, we could all use a care plan. We could all use some strategy, something that we do that is nourishing our own hearts and minds and bodies. I know for me, I have taken to walking, I said this the other day, like Forrest Gump, every day. If I don't get some walks in, whether they're while I'm on calls or just on my own, that has been my care plan. That has been the thing that helps me breathe deeper, show up and be more present. I reach out to people who I know love and care about me and connect with them. So what is your care plan? How are you taking an intentional moment to know how you are caring for yourself in these moments as you're caring for your families and your kids, those of you who have them, and your coworkers and your community? We are managing so much right now. So what are the things? And yes, chocolate. Thank you, Catherine. And puzzles. Thank you, Michael. Keep them coming. Ideas that we can share with each other, because what we also know is when we're living in these moments of our own fear and trauma, it can be hard to think of things. So share away. Know who you can call, text, and video chat with, right? When you need support. Have that person lined up, whatever it might be. Lots of people are doing happy hours or tea time or dance parties or game night. There's all kinds of ways, but know who you can go to for support and who can listen to you and be there for you. figure out how your team will stay connected. I know in visitation work, sometimes we're all like coming and going like the wind anyways, like visiting one family or the next and moving along. But I was reading somewhere this idea of like, how do we create those sort of break room opportunities to like come together, where you're like going to fill up your water or to get another cup of coffee or to have a snack, or you're sitting and having lunch. Like, how are you finding ways to keep connected as a team, to sort of reinvent those opportunities virtually with each other, are going to be really important to help you stay connected, and not just connected to talk about families and talk about the work, but just to, take some time to talk about what the latest Netflix show you've been watching, and or what it is you're doing, the book you're reading, the podcast you found helpful, how crazy your kids are making you, how grateful you are that there are teachers, because this homeschool business is really hard, whatever it might be. Practice gratitude. There's a science behind it. We know that it helps, so whatever moments you can take to just find those moments of thanks for the people, for the things, big or small. However you can bring gratitude into your daily life, it will help you. We use it here as a counter in our family. Anytime someone says something negative or even some way, I will say, like, my wife is like such an empath, and she is always thinking about others, and she'll say things like, I know, like, I'm getting to go to the doctor and get this thing fixed, but there are people right now who wouldn't be able to do this, and I just feel for them. And I feel for them too. And I said, and what's the counter? Like, how do we also have gratitude? Because just feeling like there are people who have less than us, that doesn't make us more generous. We also have to know that, like, suffering is relative, and that's okay. And so bringing gratitude as the counter to maybe those moments where we may find other things to complain about or be upset about or be outraged about. Be gentle and loving with yourself and those around you. Like, take a breath. More love. That's all I can say is more love, the better, and more kindness. And you can't be kind and loving with others if you aren't doing that for yourself. So if you're being hard and putting a lot of pressure on you, you can't give it to others. So you got to give to yourself all that you want to give to those around you. And of course, find joy in those little things. Catherine just said, sending funny videos to my staff. Yoga and pet snuggles, I love that. A lot of cooking, journaling. Find joy in those things that make your heart sparkle just a little bit, that make you smile, that remind us of our humanity, and that laughter and levity are important even when things feel so difficult, when it all feels overwhelming. Find a moment, find something, whatever it might be, and hold it tight, and find the other things that help you. Last, we found this online, and I'm just going to read it because I think that it's a good reminder for all of us, right? Remember that you're not working from home, you're at home during a crisis trying to work, right? I think it's such an important reframe on what we're all trying to do. Your personal, physical, mental, and emotional health is more important than anything else. It really is. I mean, there are lots of urgent things around us right now, but if we are not well, if we are not together, we cannot show up in the ways that we want to. So it is important, and it is the most important. Don't work longer hours because you're not getting all the things done, because you're homeschooling and you're home and you're working in a closet and you're feeling sad and overwhelmed and grieving and all of those things, right? Like, good boundaries, good limits. It's okay. We'll get it done. Again, I think this is sort of what we were just saying. Like, you will be kind to yourself and not judge how you're coping based on how you see others coping. So comparison is like the devil. Do not compare. We are all different. We all do things different. We need different things. And that you'll be kind to others and not judge how they're coping based on how you're coping, right? We're all given the best we can. And that your team success will not be measured the same way it was when things were normal, right? Hold that, remember that. We are not being held to the same, like we can't possibly be doing everything we were doing before we were living in the conditions we're living now. And so love and kindness for yourselves, and remember to be gentle, and to remember to not set unrealistic expectations for ourselves during this time. And that will help us be more present, less judgmental, and more loving to the families who we're working with. Amrita?
And so we wanted to end with a closing reflection. And so I'm just going to read the question. Before returning to work, your family, and all other things you're juggling right now, take a moment to jot down 1 to 2 things that bring you hope. Write them in a place that you can easily access and look to when you need a loving reminder of your strength, resilience, and joy. And, while Jen was doing this amazing job of the webinar, I was sitting here and thinking about this question. And maybe I'm sort of like a lot of the people that are listening, where I immediately went to work. Like, what are the 2 things that give me hope and joy when I think of my life? I think of work sometimes. And so maybe a little bit of direction with this question is maybe 1 thing that gives you hope from your work, and 1 thing that gives you hope from your personal life. And I know Inspire asks a lot of you to do self-reflection, and so I might just share mine, but I would like to say that as I was thinking about this question, one of the things that gives me hope is how my 1-year-old can play with the same toy every day for 8 hours straight right now. And then also looking for hope is how I've been connecting with all different people right now doing this service, and really working hard to figure out how they're going to make remote visits work. And I'm just feeling very grateful for everyone's continued care and compassion for all the families that we're serving. Jen, Beth, would you like to add anything?
I'd just like to add to remember to just pause. So if you're in this moment of seeing the clock and seeing that we have 3 minutes left of this webinar and you have something scheduled at the top of the hour, to take a minute and just pause and breathe, and find moments where you can do that as much as possible each and every day throughout the day, and not feel like you have to keep your head above water every second, of just pausing and doing whatever it is that gives you pleasure, gives you a smile in your face, a warm feeling in your heart. Find those and hold on to them. And remind yourself in those moments where it's really hard of what that moment of finding happiness and smiles in your heart felt like. And relive it every chance you get. So the other, sorry, I'm going to.
Oh, no, that's okay. And lastly, we are here to support you through call, text, or email us, evenings and weekends included. This time is, not an 8 to 5 time, so we're definitely here to respond to your needs. And if you have any questions or just want to talk, Inspire is here for you.
Just a reminder, we will be together again tomorrow on this webinar platform. Again next Monday with our colleague Erin Fairchild talking about how to support kids. And then again on the same webinar platform next Wednesday, and every Wednesday thereafter for the month of April, we'll be taking on a training topic. And then we will also have our drop-in calls continue through the month of April as well. We have moved to a Tuesday, Thursday drop-in session. All of that you can find on our website. All of the links, all of the list of calls you can pop on our website. There's a special page that you can link to, and it has all the links to just click and join whatever call you're wanting to join. So be kind and gentle to yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your day and keep on.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.